This picture didn't emerge from desire. This picture emerged from necessity within me. Throughout the ages, the sacred writings have conveyed a singular truth to us. The life of Jesus ended on the 6th day of the week and returned on the 1st. Yet a question lingers through the centuries. What transpired during the day sandwiched between those two moments? What became of Jesus during those hidden hours? Can you imagine? The response to that ancient question is currently being captured on film in the southern regions of Italy. Mel Gibson has returned to the director's chair, and the footage he's assembling right now will reshape the landscape of Christian filmmaking in ways we cannot yet fully comprehend. He's bringing the resurrection of Christ to the screen. Word of this project has sent shockwaves across the globe. The resurrection of Christ will not arrive as a single picture. Instead, it will unfold across two separate films. The opening installment will premiere on Good Friday in the year 2027. The second installment will follow exactly 40 days afterward on Ascension Day, the precise calendar date when Jesus ascended into the heavens. So why divide this narrative into two separate releases? Between the debut of these two films, something without precedent in cinema history will unfold in theaters around the world. Before we continue, please like and subscribe if you're enjoying this. According to Gibson's own words, this represents one unified narrative designed not merely for passive viewing, but for active participation in real time. Just as the disciples experienced those days 2 millennia in the past, audiences today will walk through the 40-day period separating the resurrection from the ascension. Gibson is extending an invitation to all believers to relive the most transformative season in the story of humanity. The Passion revealed to us the manner of Jesus' death. The resurrection will reveal to us the reason his death transformed everything that came after, forever. This represents the culmination, the closing movement of the greatest narrative ever told. Gibson has stated clearly that his intention is not to produce a religious film, but rather to create a spiritual experience, something that brings the viewer face to face with their own faith, just as his first film brought them face to face with their own guilt. During a conversation with Stephen Colbert, Gibson made a declaration that still echoes. This will stand as the greatest event in the history of humanity. Suffering is universal. We all understand it. But few truly grasp the magnitude of what unfolded after the cross. Christ did not simply return from the dead. He conquered the entire realm of death itself. The production has remained shrouded in absolute secrecy. Yet Mel Gibson has stated plainly that this will become the biggest film in cinema history, 5 times more epic in scale than The Passion. The filming, which Gibson intended to commence following the pandemic, has experienced multiple delays because of his uncompromising pursuit of perfection. He has revisited the very locations in Matera, Italy, where he captured The Passion years ago, intending to reconstruct first-century Jerusalem with even greater attention to authentic detail. For years, speculation insisted that Jim Caviezel would reprise his role as Jesus. He even acknowledged this possibility during interviews. But in 2025, Mel Gibson arrived at an unexpected choice. He would not be bringing back the original ensemble. According to Gibson's explanation, the reasoning was both artistic and symbolic in nature, because every generation must encounter the face of Christ through fresh eyes. The central role now belongs to Finnish actor Jaakko Otonen, joined by Mariella Garaga portraying Mary Magdalene, Kasia Smutniak as the Virgin Mary, Pier Luigi Pacino as Peter, and Riccardo Scamarcio as Pontius Pilate. The budget exceeds $100 million, more than twice what The Passion of the Christ required. But what truly unsettles is not the financial investment, it's the theological and visual challenge of depicting the afterlife. His team is collaborating with theologians, historians, and visual artists to render the spiritual realm between death and resurrection. The sequences where darkness attempts to hold back the light, where Christ shatters the chains of condemnation. Mel Gibson has explained that his goal is not to provoke, but to reveal. He wants the audience to comprehend that the resurrection is not a happy ending, but rather the beginning of an invisible war. So, in the director's own words, the Passion was about suffering. The resurrection will be about power. He doesn't want to show how Christ came back to life. He wants to show why he did, not for his own sake, but for ours. In one of his most recent statements, Gibson distilled his entire purpose into a single line. The Passion showed how much Christ loved us. The resurrection will show how far that love went. For years, he wrote in secrecy alongside his brother Donald and Braveheart screenwriter Randall Wallace. And in a recent conversation, Mel framed it with a phrase that haunts you. It will be like a mystical journey, a descent, and then an ascension. Because the resurrection of Christ will not limit itself to showing Jesus' victory over death, it will explore what genuinely occurred between Friday and Sunday. While Christ's physical body lay within the tomb, the descent of Christ into hell, something never before depicted on film. Many are wondering which language the movie will employ. With the Passion of the Christ, Gibson had an obsession that drove every decision. He wanted the audience to experience Christ's suffering as though they were standing there witnessing it firsthand. He didn't want people to watch the Passion. He wanted them to feel it, not as some distant historical account, but as if it were unfolding before their own eyes. That's why Gibson eliminated English entirely from the screenplay. He insisted that every syllable be spoken in the tongues that would have been heard in first-century Judea. Aramaic, the everyday language of Jesus and his disciples; Hebrew, the sacred language of Scripture; and Latin, the language of the Roman Empire that condemned him to death. Not a single word of English appeared in the film. This decision became one of the primary reasons Hollywood studios passed on financing the film. But they were mistaken. The Passion of the Christ became the highest-grossing non-English language movie in the history of cinema. A global phenomenon. The language barrier wasn't an obstacle. It became the very bridge that transported us there. So will Gibson employ the same strategy again? The answer is both yes and no. Initially, the plan was to replicate that strategy, complete immersion in the ancient tongues. But the mission of this new film stands apart from the first. The Passion was about Christ's personal, intimate suffering. The resurrection, by contrast, is about a message that must explode outward and reach every corner of the world. That's why the strategy has shifted. The film will be bilingual in nature. We will hear Aramaic, certainly. In the disciples' conversations, in the streets of Jerusalem, we will feel the authenticity of their native tongue. We will hear the Roman authorities speaking Latin, reminding us of the power structure that oppressed them. But we will also hear a significant amount of English. Why this shift? Because the message of the resurrection is not meant to remain hidden, but to be proclaimed openly, as Jesus himself commanded his disciples before he ascended. Go, therefore, and make disciples of all nations. The aim is no longer simply to feel one person's sorrow, but to grasp the hope intended for all humanity. Aramaic will anchor us in the historical reality, but English will carry the news of the empty tomb to the ends of the earth. No subtitles will be necessary. That's the new vision. The opening chapter of the resurrection of Christ begins exactly where the Passion concluded. The hour is 3 o'clock in the afternoon on Friday. Darkness has descended over Jerusalem. After hours of unbearable agony hanging from the cross, Jesus breathes his final breath. And with a voice that pierces the silence, he declares, "It is finished." In that precise moment, something fractures at the very heart of the world. The veil of the temple in Jerusalem, a massive curtain nearly 60 feet in height that separated humanity from the presence of God, tears completely in two from the top to the bottom. The earth shakes violently, rocks split apart, and certain tombs break open. The Roman centurion in charge, a man thoroughly familiar with death and violence, observes it all. His throat tightens, and he declares, "Truly, this man was the Son of God." The sacrifice was complete. But to his followers, hope appeared to have died with him. John, Mary, the mother of Jesus, and the women who had faithfully followed him stood at a distance, hearts shattered, watching. The afternoon was slipping away, and Jewish law was unambiguous. The body had to be buried before nightfall, before the Holy Sabbath began. But who would dare to claim his body? Suddenly, a man named Joseph of Arimathea decided to take action. A respected member of the Sanhedrin, he was also a secret disciple of Jesus. He approached Pilate, looked the Roman governor directly in the eye, and stated, "Give me the body of Jesus." Pilate, after confirming the death had occurred, nodded his consent. With authorization secured, Joseph rushed to Golgotha. He did not act alone. Nicodemus, another member of the Sanhedrin, who once visited Jesus under cover of night, joined him. Quickly they lowered the lifeless body of Jesus from the cross. The wind blew cold, and darkness began to blanket everything. The women watched, tears streaming down their faces. Mary Magdalene pressed her hands against her chest, attempting to contain the unbearable pain. Very close by, in a garden, stood a new tomb carved into the rock where no one had ever been laid. This tomb belonged to Joseph. They carried the body there, wrapped him carefully in a linen shroud, and anointed him with spices and oils. They laid him upon the cold stone, and with tremendous effort rolled a massive rock to seal the entrance. The Roman guards placed their seal upon the tomb. The disciples went into hiding, shattered by fear and grief. Everything seemed finished. Jesus was dead and buried. But it was not the end. It was the beginning. While the body of Jesus lay cold and motionless in the darkness of the tomb, the Spirit of Christ descended into hell. To that place the Bible calls Hades, or Sheol. But why did he descend to that place? According to Scripture, Jesus did not enter hell as one condemned, but as an invader. He went there to wage a battle. As Mel Gibson has revealed, the film will transport us to this moment, the descent of Christ into Hades. A genuine journey into the depths that no film has ever shown. Gibson has described this sequence as the most visually challenging of his entire career. He intends to show what no film has ever attempted to depict. Picture the scene unfolding below. The souls of the righteous waited there. Adam and Eve, longing for redemption from their first fall. Abraham, the father of faith. King David, the prophets. They were all prisoners, not because of sin, but because of death itself, which had not yet been conquered. They were waiting for a promise that spanned millennia. The reason for this descent is staggering. Jesus had to strip the enemy of his legal claim over humanity. As Revelation declares, "And I have the keys of death and of Hades." To hold those keys, he had to descend and take them by force. The film will explore the moment when the Messiah's soul enters that realm of darkness. Satan believes he has achieved victory. He believes that by killing the Son, he has silenced God. But then, to his horror, he realizes he has committed the fatal mistake. The enemy's plan became his own trap. By making death swallow a sinless man, the enemy poisoned death from within. Death cannot hold life. This is a universal law. In that instant, Christ is revealed not as a victim, but as a king. Mel Gibson describes this moment as a breaking of chains. It is the fulfillment of the ancient prophecy, the woman's offspring crushing the serpent's head. Christ shatters the bronze gates and the iron bars. This is a conquest. Jesus frees the captives. He transforms the prison into a victory parade. And as that burst of light shook the foundations of the underworld, up on the surface, something was about to unfold. Sunday was drawing near, and with it, a dawn that would alter the universe forever. Mel Gibson has explained that he's not attempting to provoke, but to reveal. He wants audiences to understand that the resurrection is not a tidy, happy ending. It's the beginning of an invisible war. The first part of the resurrection of Christ will continue to unfold the story. What occurred at daybreak on Sunday when Mary Magdalene arrived at the tomb with other women? Jesus had died. The disciples were hiding, flooded with grief and fear. But then, while Jerusalem still slept, a dawn unlike any other broke across the sky. This is Resurrection Sunday, Easter Sunday. This day is the cornerstone upon which the entire Christian faith stands. That dawn breathed life into faith. Resurrection Sunday represents the culmination of the sacred Triduum, the 3 holy days that commemorate the passion, death, and resurrection of Jesus Christ, forming the beating heart of Holy Week. And it began with a small group of women. Mary Magdalene and other faithful followers set out for the tomb where they believed Jesus lay. But then the impossible occurred. The nearly 2-ton stone had been rolled away from the entrance. The tomb stood empty. The body of Jesus was no longer there. In the midst of the confusion, Mary Magdalene sat down weeping inconsolably. Then a man approached her, but her eyes, blurred by tears, prevented her from recognizing him, until the man spoke her name, Mary. Mary looked up and recognized him. It was him. In that instant, everything changed. Jesus was alive. She moved toward him to embrace him, to hold on to him. But Jesus lifted a gentle hand and spoke to her. "Don't cling to me, for I have not yet ascended to the Father. Go to my brothers and tell them, I am ascending to my Father and your Father, to my God and your God." Mary realized this was not a reunion to linger over. It was a mission. Without delay, she ran back to the room where the disciples were hiding. The other women who accompanied her witnessed the same thing and hurried back to the city. On the way, Jesus suddenly appeared before them and greeted them with a simple greeting. They embraced him. He was real, tangible. Jesus was alive, and he said to them, "Do not be afraid. Go and tell my brothers." The women ran, overjoyed, to deliver the great news to the disciples. But the disciples did not believe them. In those days, a woman's testimony counted for nothing, not even in a Jewish court, regardless of how many women testified. Jesus chose a company of women, the very ones the world rejected, to announce the most important event in history. Everyone had lost faith except Peter and John, who raced to the tomb with a spark of hope remaining. When they arrived, the tomb was empty. Jesus was not there. All they discovered were the linens laid out perfectly, as if the body had evaporated from within them. The headcloth was folded and set apart in a different place. A strange detail John never forgot. Rumor has it, this will mark the end of the film's first act. It will close with the shocking scene of the empty tomb. Almost everyone knows the story of the resurrection. The stone rolled away, the empty tomb. But here's what matters most. The event that transformed a handful of terrified fishermen into founders of a faith that spread across the world. It was what happened over the next 40 days. A time of appearances, doubts, and utter confusion. 40 is the number of preparation and transformation. Moses spent 40 days alone on Mount Sinai before receiving the law that would establish a nation. For 40 years, the people of Israel wandered the wilderness, leaving slavery behind to become a free people. 40 days. That's how long Jesus spent in the wilderness, tempted and strengthened, just before he began his earthly mission. And it's because the first part of the resurrection of Christ will end with the empty tomb. The story will stop right there, and the world will have to wait 40 days to see the second part. But why has Mel Gibson split his film in two? Stranger still, why leave 40 days between one premiere and the next? What does Gibson expect to happen during that time? The answer is not a marketing strategy. The answer is found in the Bible itself. He divided it in two because he wants the film to breathe at the same pace as the Gospels. The 40 days after the resurrection were a time of absolute tension. His disciples were in hiding, broken by fear. And suddenly, he would appear. First to Mary Magdalene, then to the disciples, and to more than 500 people. Each appearance was a confrontation, a heart vaulting from terror to unbelief, and from unbelief to certainty. It was a season of unanswered questions, when Jesus was restoring their faith and preparing them for something they still could not grasp. Carrying his message to the very ends of the earth. By spacing the releases 40 days apart, Gibson is crafting a spiritual wilderness for the viewer. He wants you to leave the first film with your heart stirred. The story holding you in suspense, full of doubts, theories, and debate. That's the plan. Gibson hopes that in those 40 days, the same thing will happen as in the New Testament. That some will be scandalized, that others will doubt, that many will investigate, and that a great multitude will begin to experience a faith born of living through these 40 days. And here's the key to it all. By leaving that empty space, Gibson wants the audience to live in the gap. The first film will end, and people will walk out of the theater, some with faith ignited, others with more doubts than before. But all will then pass through 40 days in a spiritual wilderness. The number 40 is God's time for forging character. And now Gibson lays it on you. Gibson hopes that for the viewer, these 40 days will also be a time of testing. Those 40 days from the resurrection to the ascension were a season of transformation, from fear to hope, and from hope to doubt, until finally arriving at an unshakable conviction. That's the arc Gibson wants to unfold. The stakes are enormous. In a world that forgets everything in 24 hours, will audiences stay interested? Will the film hold together as a complete work or feel fractured? What if people simply move on without ever reflecting? Can a film ask that much of us today? And here's the blunt conclusion. Gibson is not making a movie about faith. He's making a movie that is an act of faith. Before he turned on a single camera, Mel Gibson did something almost no director does. He went on pilgrimage. He's been seen in places like Mount Athos, the mountain of monasteries, and photographed in settings tied to the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, where tradition locates the cross, the tomb, and the resurrection. Some outlets have even reported that Gibson has attempted to include relics of Christ in the production to bring more authenticity to the shoot. And it would not be the first time. Remember that during the filming of The Passion of the Christ, something deeply unsettling occurred. From day one, unnatural events began happening behind the scenes, turning the set into a place of utter mystery. Strange presences, conversions, impossible coincidences. One of the most terrifying incidents took place in the hills of Matera, Italy. While they were filming the Sermon on the Mount, a scene of hope, the weather shifted dramatically. Out of nowhere, a bolt of lightning split the sky and struck Jim Caviezel directly, lighting him up and leaving the crew paralyzed. But the impossible happened. Seconds later, when assistant director Jan Michelini ran to help, a second bolt hit the exact same spot, knocking them both down. They survived without serious injuries, but the smell of ozone and a rising fear saturated the set. But the tension was not only coming from above. Mel Gibson wanted absolute realism, and reality exceeded anything in the script. In the brutal scourging scene, the actors playing Roman soldiers were supposed to use prop whips. Instead, a mistake made one strike real. The whip's metal tip sank into Caviezel's back, ripping open a gash more than a foot long, and tearing from him a scream that's preserved forever in the film. The ordeal continued. When carrying a real 150-pound cross, the beam crashed down onto his head, crushing him and dislocating his shoulder. Even so, the actor refused to stop. He kept filming, his body shaking from hypothermia as he fought a pneumonia that nearly took his life. But in the midst of so much suffering and so many strange events, something else began to happen, something no one expected. People began to change. Actors and crew, witnesses to the impossible, found faith. The actor playing Judas Iscariot, a declared atheist, converted to Christianity in the middle of filming. The suffering on screen was bearing an unexpected fruit: conversion. The line between acting and reality had completely vanished. Now, 20 years later, the same team is coming together to tell the sequel to that story. Because The Passion, with all its power and mystery, was only the beginning. The greatest and most transformative event in history had not happened yet. If filming Christ's suffering unleashed such an intense spiritual battle, what will happen when we portray his victory over death, or his ascension? But this time, something goes even further. If a film about pain could set off such a spiritual war, imagine what might be stirred by a film that dares to descend into hell, show the empty tomb, and capture the Son of God defeating death and Christ rising into heaven before the eyes of his disciples. Because in the end, this entire project converges on one decisive point: how to show the world the face of the risen Jesus. And that is where the great question everyone is asking begins. Many are asking how Gibson will portray the risen Jesus. We will find out in the second installment, arriving 40 days after the first film's debut. Here, the acting challenge facing the new lead, Jaakko Otonen, is immense. He must embody a Jesus who is the same, yet different. Someone with a glorified body that even his closest friends could not recognize at a glance. The second part of the film will open with the empty tomb seen by John and Peter, and carry through to Jesus' ascension. It will recount everything that happens over those 40 days. The appearance to the two disciples on the road to Emmaus, where Jesus sketched a roadmap through the scriptures, from Moses to the last prophet. He explained how everything pointed to a Messiah who had to suffer in order to enter his glory. Cinematically, the risen Jesus cannot look like a translucent ghost. Gibson always insists on maximum realism. After this appearance, the two disciples run to tell the others what happened. They have been with Jesus. He has risen. It is then that Jesus appears in the midst of his disciples in Jerusalem. And this is where Gibson wants to show radical realism. This is not a translucent ghost. Jesus has a body. He has weight. He says, "Do you have anything here to eat?" They give him a piece of broiled fish, and he eats in front of them. He shows them his hands and his feet, the marks of the nails. It is a real body, but it no longer obeys the laws of physics. He can appear and disappear at will. Theologians call it the glorified body, a fascinating idea that cinema has barely explored. Believing that someone rose from the dead is hard for many to accept. Jesus knew this, and so he arranged his next appearances to be irrefutable. He summoned them to a mountain in the stillness of Galilee, near the Sea of Galilee. And there, something extraordinary happened. Not only did the disciples appear, but hundreds of his followers at once. Suddenly, we are no longer talking about 11 witnesses. We are talking about 500. 500 people from different families and places who said they had seen the risen Jesus. This helps explain why Christianity exploded and became the fastest-growing faith in history. And now we come to the final appearance, the last moment. They gathered on the Mount of Olives near Jerusalem, the very mountain where his agony began, where he sweat blood. Suddenly, the impossible happened. Right there before their eyes, Jesus began to rise. Defying gravity, he ascended until a cloud hid him from view. This cloud was the Shekinah, the radiant glory cloud that led Israel through the wilderness, the manifest presence of God. They stood frozen, staring into the sky, until two men, dressed in white, broke the silence with a warning. "Men of Galilee, why do you stand looking into the sky? This same Jesus who has been taken up from you into heaven will come back in the same way you saw him go into heaven." But before he left, in that final moment, Jesus gave them a promise that would become the most powerful proof of all. He promised that the Spirit of God would come upon them, and that this Spirit would draw people to him throughout history. The mission was clear. The Master had conquered death, and now he entrusted them with carrying the message to the whole world. Death had been defeated. The promise had been made. Was it fulfilled? On Pentecost, the Holy Spirit descended. 3,000 people came to faith in a single day. The future was in their hands. But they were not alone. Uncertainty had given way to conviction. Fear turned into courage. The mission Jesus had entrusted to them was clear, and with the Holy Spirit as their guide, they were ready to change the world. In just a few years, the message reached the entire Roman Empire, and in time, the rest of the world. It crossed oceans, survived persecutions, dictatorships, wars, revolutions, unbelief, and ridicule, all the way to today. To this movie. For 20 years, we have talked about the Passion of the Christ as if it were a finished work. But now, suddenly, we realize the other side was missing. The victory was missing. The Passion of the Christ showed us the suffering, the price. We watched and shuddered. The film ended at the tomb with a promise. But a promise is not the end of the story. It is the beginning of the next chapter. With the resurrection of the Christ, what Mel Gibson is doing is not simply releasing another biblical movie. He is bringing it full circle. He is completing the work. He is turning that account of suffering into the first part of a much greater story. Seen together, they are not two separate films. They are one story in three movements, a single journey in 3 acts. Act 1, Death, Crucifixion, and Confusion. Act 2, The Descent, Hades, an Invisible Battle. And Act 3, The Ascent, the appearances, the mission, the hope. In a few years, many will not speak of the Passion and the Resurrection separately. They will talk about one thing, the Christ diptych. 6 hours of cinema to journey from start to finish through the greatest mystery of the Christian faith, the complete story of Christ, from the cross and the tomb to the victory over death, all in a single work, a complete journey. But Gibson has another secret. In a private talk in 2023, he said that the resurrection will contain a sequence no one will ever forget, a vision of the beyond, inspired by the Apocalypse of John and the Messianic Psalms. Does this mean Gibson will also film the book of Revelation? Will we see Jesus glorified, the King of Kings? Maybe that's the real key to it all. Maybe the resurrection is not just a movie about what happened in an empty tomb, but the visual prologue to something far greater. Because if Gibson dares to step into the realm of the apocalypse, we are no longer talking only about the historical Jesus, the teacher walking through Galilee, or even the risen Christ who appears to his disciples. We are talking about the glorified Jesus, the King of Kings, the one John saw on Patmos. Eyes like flames of fire, a face shining like the sun, and a voice like the roar of many waters. What if Gibson is priming audiences to witness something Hollywood has never dared to touch? The book of Revelation, the trumpets, the seals, the rider called faithful and true, the final reign of Christ. For now, no one knows for sure. There is no official announcement of a Revelation film, but the hint is there. A vision of the beyond drawn from John and the Messianic Psalms. It could be an unforgettable sequence. It could be the first cinematic glimpse of what's to come, the second coming of Jesus. What do you think? Do you believe Gibson will actually show Jesus in his second coming? If you also believe this movie will not just be cinema, but a spiritual awakening for a new generation, let me know in the comments. If you too feel this will be more than just a trip to the movies, I want to hear from you in the comments below. Tell us what you are hoping to see, because, as Mel Gibson said, this story is not meant just to be watched. It is meant to be lived. Many people around the world are already getting ready. Grab your calendar right now and circle this date in red. Good Friday, 2027. If the Passion changed thousands of lives by showing the price of love, then the resurrection now promises to show us the power of that love. Subscribe to this channel and hit the bell, because we are going to follow every revelation from this shoot, step by step. Here, we will keep digging into the mysteries the Bible holds, for those who still have ears to hear.